hello, and welcome to my presentation. Let me get started. So the title is How the Local Context Mediates Motivations for Teaching English in Korean Primary Schools. And this presentation is based on a study that was published last year in the GETA Journal of Education Policy, and there's a link if someone wants to look it up later. So why work? Why work? Well, this is my recent research interest, and it breaks down into two areas. The first, motivations for teaching. So this is asking about why do people want to become teachers, or why do people choose the career they do? And the second area is about occupational commitment, which is about why people continue to work in a profession and why do people continue to work in their current workplaces. So what is the kind of psychology that's keeping us in the jobs that we're in? Why work? And so my recent research has been looking at this. Why do people teach English? So I've been really curious about these questions. Why do people start teaching English? And then why do people continue or stop teaching English? Okay. And so this domain for this study here is about career motivations. So research on motivations for teaching shows that people choose teaching for a variety of reasons, but it's mostly for things like having positive experience as learners, wanting to make a difference in the lives of students, lacking better career alternatives and things like that. And so generally they fall into intrinsic, altruistic, and external factors. So intrinsic might be having a positive experience with a former teacher, or altruistic factors, or we want to make a difference in our communities or the lives of students. And those are external factors like maybe the teaching was a job that came up and there weren't many other opportunities available. So one of the gaps identified was that there really needs to be a better understanding of the motivations and commitment with in-service teachers, and particularly in Korea, this was an area that was in need of attention. So as I continue, let's throw myself over here. So how do people become English language teachers? So this study is with primary school English teachers, and they're civil servants in Korea. And so as probably most of you know, there's 13 colleges of education. So they need to major in either one of the 12 public ones or Ewha Women's University. Then there's a rigorous application exam. And then once they're in the school, they're hired as general teachers, not as English teachers. So they have to volunteer to teach English or be delegated or designated by the principal within their school. And in some cases, they can take in-service education, in-service English education retraining or training. But in that case, still, the principal has to designate them to teach English full-time. And so what does the prior research say? Well, why do people want to become teachers in general? Well, the status is pretty good in Korea. So Kim's study a long time ago looked at how teaching was nearly as popular among high school students as becoming a doctor, for example, because of the status and working conditions. I'm sorry about myself here. I'm not going to restart it. We could just accept this interesting reality here. So the social and legal status and working conditions are quite prevalent in drawing people to teaching. And then why do people teach English in primary schools? Well, a couple studies have looked at that. So Jung and Norton, when they looked at it when the curriculum started in the early 2000s, late 1900, that the principals were really the ones who decided. And then a recent study that I did looked at how continuance and normative commitments were involved in having people teach Korea. So in general, continuance, about not really having a choice to teach English, and normative is doing something because you're expected to do it, which was the case with 4 teachers in this case study. So today is going to explore these topics in a little more detail. And so this study looks at, why do people want to become public school teachers in Korea? And why do Korean teachers commit to teaching English in primary schools? And so the participants for this study, there, that's a little better, were 20 Korean English teachers, all public school tenured teachers. They're 15 female, 5 males, and they were all teaching in Gyeongbuk province at the time. And the data set came from a reflective writing activity that we did. And this is what the writing activity looks like. So it has 8 prompts here, and it starts, the teachers were asked to answer these questions and try to put it together in a narrative. So it says, I remember the first time I thought about becoming a teacher. This was when. The biggest reasons why I became a teacher include, the people who influenced me most were, they influenced me by, so we're looking at kind of socialization influences here. And then I started teaching English because, so the reasons why people turn from general education to English. And then 6, 7, 8 are slight topic shift. So before I started teaching English, I thought that being an English teacher was blank. Now I think that being an English teacher is blank. In the future, I hope to blank. But really for this study, it's going to focus on the first 5 prompts, especially the 5th prompt here. So it's a qualitative study. It follows the general qualitative procedures. And let's get right to it. So the first set of findings, here are the main themes for why do people want to become teachers. So extrinsic motivation was clearly the dominant theme in these 20 teacher stories, with 52 mentions from 20 teachers. So here are some of the excerpts, an example excerpt. So the biggest reasons why I became a teacher include, we see as BG said, a public school teacher is practically the only job where women don't have to worry about being discriminated because of gender. And HY was an older teacher, and he mentioned that at that time our country was poor, so we couldn't think about future hope. So again, just to review, 52 mentions of things like this, of extrinsic types of motivation for wanting to become a teacher. The second major theme was socialization, which got 23 mentions in the stories. So the biggest aspect, as it's probably unsurprising, is that influence of family members. Okay, and the other aspect of this, why do the family members really encourage their children to become teachers? So especially parents encourage their children to become teachers. Well, it's because of the status and working conditions. So here's a good example excerpt from a participant who said, the biggest reasons I became a teacher were actually my parents' pressure. Especially my father, who was a teacher for more than 40 years, always told me since I was a little kid that I should become a teacher. And my mother pushed me to keep up my grading enough to go to the University of Teachers. It was almost a threat at that time, but I tried my best to make them happy. So we really can see a sense of that socialization and that pressure from this participant's parents in this excerpt. Okay, and then the third major theme in the findings is that the more intrinsic and altruistic motivations were somewhat uncommon. So unlike the statistical-based research from Korea showed that there wasn't a lot of evidence of this when we actually looked at in-service teacher stories. So one category was desire to teach, and another work with or influence children. So there was some evidence, but not very much of this being a big influence according to these teacher stories. So an example here, the biggest reasons why I became a teacher include, Like MH said, I like teaching and helping somebody. I always help my friends, and I felt happy about that. Then the next phase, this is what I want to focus on today. It's more about, so these teachers became primary school teachers and were general homeroom teachers in the primary school system in Korea. So what brought them from being homeroom teachers to teaching English? And we're going to see there's some intrinsic interest, so some interest in English, and a lot of extrinsic motivation. So being assigned to teach English was a pretty common theme as well. So each were mentioned roughly 6 times in these 20 stories. So an example of intrinsic motivation, the interest in English. I started teaching English because I like to study English, and my English ability was pretty good. So I wanted to teach English to my students. Or another example, I started teaching English for being assigned to teach. I started teaching English because there were not many teachers who wanted to. Then I was younger than other teachers, so I had to take it. So of course, there's more themes coming through in DW's excerpt here. But for the sake of time, I want to continue and talk about what really came through in the stories was that the teacher assignment and rotation system was crucial in mediating how all these teachers, all these 20 teachers ended up going from homeroom teaching to teaching English full-time. And so I made this little model to kind of show on how this process works. So at the top here, well, there's the personal motivational factors. So there's some combination of intrinsic, extrinsic, and altruistic factors that are perhaps leading some teachers to want to teach English or being forced to teach English in primary schools. So those create their motivations for teaching. And in this case, we're talking about English, but it also applies to whatever grade or other subject like PE or science or art and so on that a teacher might want to do if they have an opportunity. So what happens at the beginning of the year or prior to a school year, they fill out some paperwork where they request an assignment. So it's a document with ranked choices for whatever grades and subject that a teacher wants to teach. Then there's usually a teacher committee that gives some input, and the teacher committee's role is to help the principal decide ultimately who's going to teach. But it is the principal that decides, okay, who's going to get a grade or subject, like who's going to teach grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And if the school has a full-time English teacher, who's going to be that teacher? So it's really up to the principal. And this is based on somewhat on the teacher's characteristics. So factors like their seniority at a school, their seniority within the school system, their education and experience, their age and gender does also influence it, and their social capital within the school with the principal, vice principal, and the teacher committee and so on. And then the principals also consider the needs of the school. Do we have enough faculty? Is there sufficient faculty to have one person just teach English? And other subjects as well. And then there's also the local stakeholders' expectations, particularly what do the parents in this area expect? Do they really expect there to be a full-time English teacher? That can have an influence as well. But really there's this rotation and assignment system that is mediating all the teachers' motivations and commitments for teaching English in primary schools. And to demonstrate this, I'll just talk about one extra case study. I'll look at one of these teachers and how they navigated this system as they went through their career, switching back and forth from English to homeroom teaching. So in this case, one of the participants, let's call her Mia, at the time of the study, she had about 16 years of teaching experience, And she had taught 2 years full-time as an English teacher. This was her second English teacher. So we're focusing on the question, why did she commit to teaching English? And so what was her commitment mindset, motivational mindset behind that? So after she had been a teacher for about 11 or 12 years, she expressed that she wanted to be recharged. She was getting slightly burnt out of homeroom teaching, which is understandable after 10 years. And so she wanted a more flexible schedule than homeroom teaching. And she also thought that, oh, teaching English will be easy. I'll just kind of have like a year off and just, have fun teaching kids teaching kids because it's easy. Well, of course, that turned out not to be the case, but that's what was motivating her. And she thought also, oh, I'll have less duties than homeroom teaching. And so I'm going to switch from motivation to commitment research. And if we look at that, we can say there was an effective side of her commitment to homeroom teaching, that she wanted to be recharged. So she wanted to be refreshed. And she quite liked being a homeroom teacher, but she just kind of needed a break from it. And then in these other motivations or reasons are what breaks down into what we call continuance commitment. So these ones, continuance commitment is more based on calculations. So she's making kind of a cost benefit type decision here, having more flexibility, thinking it's easy, and thinking it has less duties than homeroom teaching. But however, she found out that her assumptions about teaching English did not hold up. It was much harder than she thought. It was a little bit more stressful. She definitely wasn't recharged. She was really challenged. She found it's quite hard to educate students in language. So what happened? Well, the next year she went back to being a homeroom teacher because she ended up having too many extra duties as an English teacher, so she didn't want to do it. And she had real difficulties in the classroom with student behavior that she never had as a homeroom teacher. And she just couldn't get students to use English in class. So she felt really frustrated and ineffective as a teacher. So after 1 year of teaching, she went back to homeroom teaching. And then in her school, she had some seniority. And so of course she was allowed to do so. And she was assigned to homeroom teaching. Again, then a year or two later, she had to switch schools. And when she switched schools, she had to transfer schools. And this was her second year that she committed to teaching English or volunteered to teach English, because she thought, well, if I go to a new school, the principal's going to assign me to teach sixth grade. Sixth grade's too hard. I don't want to be a sixth grade homeroom teacher. So she thought, well, it's better to teach English than sixth grade. Okay. And then actually this second year she did it, she felt it went better than her first year. And so the second year she agreed to teach English again. So she actually continued for a third year after. She found, well, it's still better than sixth grade homeroom teaching. But then after that, after this study, she had enough, let's say, social capital seniority in the school. She got to choose her grade, and then she taught fourth grade as a homeroom teacher, and she never taught English again. And so in this case, Mia, and in all the teachers' cases, they're kind of making decisions as they navigate this teacher assignment and rotation system, coming into teaching English and out of it, not really so much because of their passion and interest in pedagogy. There's English pedagogy, but there's all other motivations and commitment mindsets involved. And so one of the big problems of this, and I'll just finish my talk here by talking about some of the implications of this system and this problem of English language teacher turnover in Korean public schools. Where am I going to put myself? Okay. I'll throw myself there. Hey. Okay, so a common theme is that all these teachers, these 20 teachers, are navigating this teacher assignment and rotation system. And mostly it's due to continuance calculations, which is something I wrote in more detail in another study as well. And it's really the principal's decision making that has the ultimate cause over people teaching English. And there's a real paucity of effective mindsets for teaching English in, at least in this study with these 20 teachers. So they're more doing it for other reasons than loving to teach English and being really interested in English language pedagogy. And so a huge implication, a huge problem in Korea is that this system induces English language teaching turnover, not commitment, in primary schools. And so in primary schools, turnover of English teachers is the norm, not the exception. And because of this, the new teachers deal with old problems. Their commitments to English language teaching tend to be short-term, so they teach maybe 1 or 2 years, go back to homeroom teaching. Then with this turnover, all that expertise is lost to the system and efficacy suffers. And as new teachers come into the system, they have to deal with the old problems, and we have this real lack of expertise in Korean primary schools. Well, there's the end. There's a lot more I could talk about. I'll leave some of it for the question time, and I'll just finish with a list of selected reference. Oh, wait a minute. Those are all mine. How did those get on there? Oh, well, they're there now. I'll just leave them there. How do we end a conversation like this, a presentation like this? I don't really know. So I'll just leave it there. If you guys have questions, you can do it through, I don't know, YouTube, are we doing it? Or through email is fine. If you can see, ianmoodie@gmail.com is my email. And wow, for those of you watching, I really thank you for coming. And yeah, all the best in your work as well. Have a wonderful day.